this is Chris. Today I'm going to take these old drawing tablets that belong to my mother and I'm going to make them into books. These are books that I've made myself and I've been making them since I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I use them as watercolor journals and travel journals. You can see more of the books that I've made on my very first video. I think it's also set up as my trailer video. This is pen and ink and watercolor. And it's covered with a batik Indian fabric. And then this one is watercolor, including some of my travels. I like to take this with me when I'm traveling. And I actually have quite a few of those, 5 or 6 just of the travel journals, and then several other books that I use for other things. So what I want to do with these is to make them into little books. This one will be 5 inches by 3.5 inches, and it'll be a drawing book. And this one is Cotman watercolor pad. I think it still has some of my mother's watercolors that she did years ago. But there's still several pages, and I can make a small book out of this one. And this one is premium recycled paper by Strathmore. This also has some of my mother's drawings in it. I will keep those. But there's plenty of paper here that I can make a book out of. So I'll be making at least 3 books out of these, maybe 4. This can most probably make 2 or 3 sketchbooks out of this one. There's a lot of paper in that one. And I'm going to start with the smallest one. And what I'm going to do first is take off the spring so that I can cut the paper. If I just try to tear the paper out of here, I'm likely to crease the paper or bend it, and it won't be as nice. So that's what I'm going to do next. Well, my camera didn't want to focus when I was preparing this text block, so I'm going to use papers from this one, and I will go ahead and cut them like I did the first one and get them ready, and then I'll show you how to prepare the text block for sewing with the larger, slightly larger papers. So I'll continue with these pages and show you how it's done. You don't necessarily need to do this with a scoreboard. If your paper's not too thick, this paper's a nice weight, you can just fold them and crease it with your nail. And that works fine for this weight paper. It's just the thicker papers fold better if you have a scoreboard. But you don't need a scoreboard, you can use a ruler and a bone folder, or even some other kind of tool from some other craft that you might do. The next thing I'll do is take these. Each one of these is called a spread, and then these are called pages, and then when we put them together, those are called signatures. I think I'll do 4 of these sheets per signature because paper is not very thick. So this will be our text block, and what we need to do is prepare it for sewing. And so I'll put this aside for a moment. And what I have here is my super duper high-tech book press. See, it says, I don't know if you can read that, it says book press on there. I made this when I was about 25. And I keep meaning to make a bigger one because it really does need to be at least this big. But I've managed to make many books on this book press. So what we're going to do is place as evenly as possible our text block right here, but we don't want it to stick up that far. We want it to stick up just a fraction. So we'll lay this down and we'll get this just a fraction, 1/16 of an inch or so, evenly. So you want all those spines to be even, and they tend to want to shift as you move them, as you press them down. So then you can make this kind of book press out of any kind of scrap of wood, as long as the wood is hardy enough not to warp. And a couple of bolts, washers, and wing nuts. So to raise the book press up, I will put it on some books. That's still not high enough, so I will get some shims. I have a collection of pub mats. This one's from Tahoe, which is about 15 miles from where I live. And these a friend of mine gave me. These are from Germany, I think. She used to live in Europe. They have cool graphics on them, but they make great shims too. So we'll shim this up, see if we can get our book balanced. There, it's not touching the table, so that will work. Now what we want to do is measure where we're going to add in our stitching lines. I hope my camera focuses this time, but what I'm going to do is just set this book is 5 inches. I'm going to mark it 1/2 inch from each end, and then 1 inch spacing across. I have 3 different saws. So this is just a little metal saw, really. It was in my dad's garage. it's a little bit rough. I would like a finer tooth than that, but it can be used. Probably just in one direction, as it's so rough it could tear up on the other direction. But we'll just go through here and we'll saw right down. And the goal will be to saw through all layers of the paper, which is pretty much a guesstimate. The other saw I have is this Stanley. I'm not sure what this is called. I think it has a Japanese name, but this one is really rough. I don't think this one is going to work as well. But let's see. Yeah, that one just wants to grab too much. Ah, there it goes. It's very thin, which is nice. Makes a thin cut. And then the saw that I usually use is this little jigsaw. And it's not quite as rough a blade. It's a little bit wider blade, but it's not quite as rough. So I just saw at my marks. Don't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be exact. You don't need any expensive equipment. Everything I have here I either made or I bought sometime for other projects and I used for several projects. It's not just for this kind of project. Okay, I'll put this away. And I'll put these away. Now, see if I can focus my camera again. So we release, oh my gosh, I put those on so hard. Release the press, if we can. There it goes. We've got our text block. And we'll check to see if we went through all 4 layers. And we did. Enough that I can work with it. It doesn't have to, since it's going through most of the layers, when I put my needle in, that will show me where the holes belong. So now we have 2 text blocks to work with. They're just about the same size. This one's a little smaller. Close. So the next step will be to set up the loom and sew them. And I think that's a fun part. I enjoy that. This is my sewing loom. As you can see, it's just as high-tech as my book press. It's a piece of 1.5 inch thick pine. It's about 12 inches square. And then I have wing nuts on the side that lift up for the loom. And I'll show you first the bottom. So here's the bottom. So I have it marked out in 1 inch increments. And here I have brass thumbtacks hammered into the bottom of the loom. And I just have foam core feet on it to raise it up. So it's all scraps. Everything's made from scraps. If you're handy in woodworking, or you know someone who is, you could do something a little bit fancier than this. So it has these 2 arms that come up, and it has wing nuts. One of them just fell off. I'll have to find it. And so I can move the camera just a bit. And up here I also have 1 inch markings, and down here, and that's where my threads are going to go. So I have all 5 of the strings on there. I'm going to turn it over. Bring them up to the top. Then I'm going to lift my loom. And then each one of these threads gets tied at the top. The last thread we have to hook up is this little thread here on the side. It goes behind the threads and in front of the wood bar, and then it just gets wrapped around this little push pin. Then we take our text block, and you remember those saw cuts that we made? Those will fit on these strings here. So we take our bottom one. If it matters which order your pages are in, you'll start with the bottom one. In this particular book, they're all blank pages, so it doesn't matter. So we'll take the bottom one, and we'll fit it in here, into those little grooves, and then we use this to hold up the pages. And that's how it looks. So I'll be working with it a little bit sideways to myself, like this. This is my little bookbinding kit. It has craft and button thread, which we used for the warp, and it has button and carpet thread, which I'm going to use for sewing, which will be the weft when you're in the weaving. It also has some waxed linen threads. I've got different size needles and some pins. I've got some bookbinding cloth and canvas, and then in here I have clips for when I'm doing pamphlet stitch sewing. So I'm going to use this needle here. It has a medium-sized hole. I want something that will take my heavier thread, and it's pretty long. It's nothing special, it's just a craft needle or a darning needle. And so I'm going to take a bit of thread. I don't want too much, I don't want it getting tangled up on me. Put that aside, and I'll thread my needle. And I'll use 1 thickness. I had to go get my beeswax. This is just the sewer's beeswax. And I'm going to run my thread through that. It just helps it to run through the paper easier and helps it to keep it from tangling up, although it'll still tend to tangle and knot. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go halfway between the first thread and the edge of the book. I'm just going to poke my needle in there. And I'm not going to make a knot, I'm just going to tie it onto here, and then that'll give me a tail that'll be long enough to tie onto the next thread later. So just tie that onto there. And then I'll come in my first hole, and I'll come in to the left side of the warp thread, pull it a little bit, and then I'll go back in on the right side of the warp thread. And then I'll come out halfway between. I'll turn this around, show you what it looks like. Now it's still hard to see. I should have used a contrasting thread in the inside too. So that's the first signature. And we'll take that out of the support and we'll lay it down. So then the next signature comes up. It gets pushed into the threads and it's held up with a little cross thread. And so what we'll do here, we'll go through here. We'll come out on the right and go through on the left. So what we're doing is we're wrapping that warp thread. Now you can do this, there's several different ways to do this. So you can go over the thread, or like we're doing, we're coming out and going around the thread and looping the thread. You could also do it without cutting so deep so that your thread sits on top and then it leaves little ridges in your spine, which is a decorative effect. And then we'll come out just above the first one. And this is where we're going to tie it off. I'm going to leave the needle on there so I know which one is which, because I want to keep that one. Do a nice square knot. And that signature's done. Now I'm going to go ahead and sew this, and I'll cut and come back and show you how we handle this end of it. Okay, I've sewn all these, and I'm coming through here at the back. So what I'll do, my thread's getting pretty short, I'm going to have to add on. So I slip it between the signatures on the right side of that stitch that I took earlier, and I pull it and slip it again. I'm not going through the paper, just between the two signatures. Doesn't want to. There we go. And pull it again. And then this signature comes down. So I'll do that all the way across with the rest of the signatures, always looping down and catching the stitch beforehand, bringing it up, catching the stitch beforehand. This one didn't get sewn through completely, so I'm going to help myself by poking through the ones that didn't get sewn deep enough. And I'm going to tie a square knot here. Get another length of thread. The warp thread doesn't have to go through saw marks through all the pages in the signature. Just being buried in the first page or two is plenty. So we're going to pull up again here. Make sure we don't get tangled up. Okay, and I will continue sewing the signature. There's two more after this one, and I will loop around here and loop around here, and then I'll show you when I get to the end how I take care of that. Okay, this is the last signature for this book. So all I have to do is, like I do at both ends, slip the needle under that stitching, pull it nice and tight, make sure I don't split the paper. And then I can carry this through one of the lower ones. And all this knotting will be taken care of when we glue the spine. So that's the first little book. And the way we release it is we just cut it here. And we cut it here. Put the loom aside. So here's our book. And we keep these long, don't cut these off, because these will help hold the book block to the cover. So I'm going to put that one aside. The paper's so thick that it just fans out. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew this one. This one's the one that's a little bit bigger. It's about an inch wider. But it's the same 5 strings, so I'll do it the same as I did this one. And then I'll come back and show you the next step. I've finished sewing the text blocks. This is the one with watercolor paper. The paper's fairly thick, so there's fewer pages, but it's still the same, about the same thickness. This one is the one made with drawing paper. It's a little bit wider. And so the next step will be to choose the book boards and attach them to the text block and then cover it. And here are some that I made years ago. This one I made with parchment paper, and I used it to copy down some different poems and prose written by different members of my family. So it includes my grandmother, my mother, my brother, and myself. And this is another one I made. I never really finished using it. There's some drawings in it and some note-taking. And it's a kind of a heavy drawing paper. So come back for part 2 and we'll put some covers on these books. Thanks for watching and happy crafting. Bye-bye.